Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a story that begins in the soft hush of a rainy afternoon, a place where time seems to move slower where old books hold forgotten confessions and names live quietly between pages. Imagine wandering into a small, tucked-away bookshop. One of those cozy spaces that smells like cedar wood and paper, where every shelf hums with secrets waiting to be rediscovered. Something tender, something that keeps whispering. This means something. Of course, you probably wouldn't confess that out loud. Who would believe that a name in a book could pull at your heart like that? And there, somewhere on the bottom shelf, behind a crooked row of dusty hardcovers, you pull out a collection of poems, weathered, gold-lettered, and warm in your hands. You flip it open, and there, written in the corner in faded ink, is someone's name, some man's name, nothing more. And yet it feels like something stirs. You don't know him, but you feel something. The shop is dim, lined with wooden shelves stacked impossibly high. You wander between the aisles, fingers brushing spines, until your hand pauses on a slim volume. Seasons of quiet longing. The cover is dark blue velvet, frayed at the edges. It feels like it has stories tucked deep inside. Books lean against one another like they've been whispering all day. Single lamp glows behind the counter. No date, no address. Just the name, slanted slightly, like it was written in a moment of hesitation or hope. Can't see anyone, but the place doesn't feel empty. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Maybe it's the way it sounds like a note that hasn't stopped echoing yet. Maybe it's the timing. Maybe it's you. Who was he? Why does his name feel like something you were always meant to find? Either way, your heart tugs in a way you can't ignore. And if you're feeling cozy, share your location and what time it is where you are. The kind of poetry that makes your throat ache without knowing why. You buy the book without hesitation, and the old woman at the counter wraps it in parchment paper without a word. But she watches you closely, kindly, as if she knows something you don't. Now, you dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's raining softly as you duck beneath the old striped awning, trying not to slip on the wet cobblestones. The air smells like rain and jasmine, and the sign hanging overhead creaks gently in the wind. Moonlight Books, you almost walk past it, distracted by your own thoughts, until something, maybe the faint glow of the shop's window. Maybe something less explainable makes you stop, step inside. Warmth wraps around you instantly. There's an old brass bell above the door that jingles softly. You're not here for anything in particular, just a quiet escape from the rain. You open it. And there, inside the front cover, you see a name written in delicate script. Julian Thorne. You whisper it under your breath. Julian Thorne. You're not sure why, but the name feels important. You flip a few pages, and the poems are soft and aching lines about seasons, and memory, and holding someone's hand in a dream. That night you can't sleep. You lie in bed. The book open beside you, the name repeating like a song. Julian Thorne. You hold the book close and wonder if you've just opened more than pages. Maybe, just maybe, you've opened a story that's been waiting for you. You wake with the book still open on your chest, one page half turned as if it tried to breathe in the middle of the night. Outside your window, the rain has stopped, but the air holds that hush that follows a storm like the world's still catching its breath. You lie there a moment longer, tracing the edge of the name with your finger. Julian Thorne. It's not just a name anymore. It's a question. And questions have a way of demanding answers. Why do you care? I was curious about the book I bought yesterday. Why does the idea of him of Julian feel like it matters? You slip the book into your bag before heading out, as if its presence is somehow protective. The bell jingles overhead and the shop feels exactly the same, like it hasn't moved a breath since you left. The woman behind the counter, white curls piled on her head, reading glasses low on her nose, smiles faintly. The streets feel washed clean this morning, puddles mirroring a pale sky. On the tram, you glance at the name again, And for a moment, you imagine he's sitting across from you, a man with soft eyes. It'd be a quiet smile, maybe one of those people who hum when they think no one's listening. Yes. It had a name inside, Julian Thorne. Many years ago, bought a copy every spring, said he was looking for something he hadn't found yet. The thought catches you off guard. People drift in and out of places like this. Maybe he found what he was looking for. What happened to him? You returned to the bookshop that afternoon, pretending you just happened to be in the neighborhood. Back again so soon, she says, and her voice is tea-warm. That soft little ache blooms behind your ribs. Then she walks around the counter slowly and gestures for you to follow her. In the margins, small dots of ink like someone tried to start a sentence but changed their mind. You follow them, page to page, and they lead you to a single stanza. But this one has no velvet cover. It's plain, marked with soft creases, as if it's been read 1,000 times. An echo, or just someone's idea of love, folded into pages and left behind like a dream, a name in a book, a feeling that won't leave you alone. If you send something out into the world, the right person might hear it, even if it takes years. You trail behind as she moves between the shelves, stopping beside an old glass case filled with worn journals and leather-bound volumes. You nod. She tilts her head. Seasons of quiet longing, wasn't it? You're surprised she remembers. The bookseller watches you for a beat too long. Without a word, she opens a drawer below the case and pulls out something thin. Another copy of the same poetry collection. She holds it out to you. You take it carefully. Inside the front cover is another inscription. It's the one I never met, but somehow knew. It's written in the same slanted script. Your breath catches. He used to come here, the woman says gently, and her eyes are far away now. Your heart swells with something impossible to name. She shrugs, but it's the kind of shrug that holds 1,000 pages of memory. One day he stopped coming. You run your finger over the inscription again? Why did he write that? The woman gives a knowing smile. Some people believe in echoes. You sit with that thought. You leave the shop with both copies, your mind whirling with questions. Was Julian real? That night, you reread the book. You notice something you missed before? Then now, I wait in the places you haven't found yet. Not as a shadow, but as a door you haven't opened. You whisper the lines aloud and your voice trembles in the quiet room. Door you haven't opened. You wonder what if Julian is waiting? What if this book isn't the end of the story, but the very beginning? And what if you've already started falling for someone you've never even met? You go back to the shop again the next day, and this time you bring a notebook. You don't know what you're hoping to find, but something about the poems, the notes in the margins, that single name they've rooted themselves in you. You can't explain it, not even to yourself. It feels strange and lovely and a little reckless. The bell rings as you enter, and the bookseller lifts her eyes from a crossword puzzle. Looking for more poetry? She asks with a soft smirk. You nod, smiling faintly. I just wanted to see if there were any other books he left behind. The light here is thinner. You follow her to a low wooden shelf beneath a window. She kneels slowly and pulls out another book, its cover worn like an old coat. But when you open it, you find more margin notes. This time they're fuller. Phrases underlined, whole lines rewritten with alternate words. It feels like reading two voices at once, the original poet and Julian, speaking back. She tilts her head again, assessing you like someone skimming a story's last chapter and trying to guess how it began. Said he didn't want to keep it anymore. He couldn't throw it away. Then, after a pause, she steps aside from the counter and motions you toward the back of the store. It's a part you had noticed before, a narrow hallway with mismatched frames lining the walls. Some with faded portraits, others with dried flowers pressed under glass. He left this once, she murmurs. He said maybe someone would find it who needed to. You take it carefully. It's a thin volume called Whispers at Dusk, and it doesn't look like much at first. And there, on the bench just across the street facing the bookstore, like a forgotten punctuation mark, you sit. You unfold it carefully. That's not just a reflection, that's a message. Why did he leave this here? A hope? I used to sit there and read every Sunday at noon, thread tied to someone still breathing. But one page stops you. It's a poem about watching someone in a cafe, too afraid to say hello. The poem ends with, "Maybe in another life, I'd have been brave." Beneath that, in the same slanted handwriting, Julian added, "That's just 2 neighborhoods away. You know that bench. You've passed it 100 times. Or maybe in this one, if you find me in time." You blink, heart stuttering. Maybe he never really meant it for anyone. Not truly. You look up at the bookseller. She offers a ghost of a smile. A part of you wants to ask more. Where did he go? What does she know? But some things feel too sacred to tug at directly. Instead, you step outside with the book pressed to your chest and sunlight brushing across your face. You flip through the book again. That's when something flutters out from between the pages. A small slip of folded paper. It's a note, no longer than a postcard. Written in the same hand. If you're reading this, you already know more than I ever expected. There's a bench in Greenwood Park. 3rd from the west gate. If the wind is kind, maybe we'll meet. Your breath catches. Greenwood Park. You fold the note again, hands trembling. Maybe it's too late. Maybe he's moved on. But maybe he left a trail. That night, your dreams are full of benches and rain and soft voices reciting poems you haven't heard yet. Sunday arrives with a hush. The morning air is still cool, touched by the memory of night rain. You wake early, even though you barely slept. The note sits on your nightstand, unfolded now, as if it needs to breathe beside you. You don't know what to wear. It's not a date, but it's something delicate. A possibility you're trying not to crush by wanting it too much. You carry the book with you, even though you know it's unnecessary. It feels like a charm, like the anchor that holds this strange feeling down in the real world. By late morning, the sun has climbed just high enough to dapple the sidewalks. Birds sing above like they've been waiting for your arrival. When you reach the west gate, you start counting benches. You arrive at Greenwood Park by 11:45, pretending not to hurry. The path winds between tall trees and quiet hedges. 1, 2, and there it is. The 3rd bench. You don't sit right away. Instead, you stand behind it, looking down like it might answer you. The wood is worn but smooth, carved with faint initials and smoothed by time. You check your watch, 11:58. Your heart pounds louder than it should. Then footsteps. His hair's a little tousled, like he didn't try too hard. Like maybe he didn't expect anything to happen. But he looks up and freezes. You turn your head slowly, afraid to hope, and there he is. He's tall, maybe early 40s, with a book under his arm and quiet eyes that seem to carry an entire sky. He opens his book, whispers at dusk. The same edition. You realize too late that you've been staring, I hoped. But hoping is easy. Believing, that's the hard part. He smiles cautiously. Mind if I? You shake your head, stepping aside.
Yes?
There's a quiet intensity in his gaze. Not heavy, but real. Have we met? He sits at the far end of the bench, the way strangers do when unsure. You sit beside him slowly, just close enough that your shoulders don't touch. A long silence stretches between you. You can feel it the way his silence isn't empty, but full. Sometimes I left things behind. Pages, letters. I used to write as if someone might be reading. I didn't know if it was foolish. Half ideas. And then he speaks. I used to come here every Sunday, he says quietly, eyes still on the page. It was a habit, a kind one. You nod, unsure of your voice. He closes the book. You swallow. Did you ever think someone might find them? His smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. You nod again. It's all you can manage. He finally looks at you. You pause. Not exactly. Something flickers across his face. You reach into your bag and pull out the worn poetry book. This was yours. He takes it with careful hands, like he's holding a part of himself he thought he lost. He flips through it, slow, reverent. Found this? You nod. In a shop, with your name inside. His throat tightens as he reads a few of the margin notes. Then, softly, I thought it would sit there forever, or be tossed away. You manage a small smile, and some things wait. A breeze stirs the trees. Leaf spins down, landing between you. Julian stares at the book again. It wasn't. There's a long pause, and then he exhales, deeply, as if he's been holding something in for a very long time. Then maybe, he says gently, you're the person I was writing for. The words hang between you, delicate and unsure. You feel them settle inside your chest like candlelight. You don't know him, not really, just not yet. But something inside you stirs. A beginning, not loud, not certain, but real. The next time you meet, it's raining again, but softer now. The kind of rain that feels more like music than weather. You both arrive at the bench without arranging it, like some invisible thread pulled you there at the same time. This time you sit closer. Julian brings a thermos of tea, jasmine and mint. He pours it into 2 chipped porcelain cups. He pulled from an old canvas bag. One of them has a crack near the rim. You take it anyway. You sip in silence for a while, watching the mist curl over the hedges. Then you ask gently, "Did you really leave the notes for someone?" He nods. "Not someone I knew, just someone." You glance sideways at him. Someone who would understand? He smiles, and it's small but warm. Someone who wouldn't laugh. Someone who still believed a name in a book meant something. The words settled deep inside you. About the girl he once wrote poems about the one he never met. But you stop yourself. You watch the rain bead along the edge of the bench, his hand resting just inches from yours. He pauses, then adds, "For a while, I thought I was writing to a version of myself, someone younger, braver. Then it shifted. You've been adding notes of your own, lines from his poems that spoke to you. When he reaches the page where you wrote, 'Maybe I've been answering him all along,' he stills. Then, softly, but sometimes echoes, take the long way back. Maybe he already does. And thoughts, your thoughts, wondering who he might be, who you were becoming just by reading him. I think I started writing to someone who might finish the sentence. I couldn't." You both sit in the hush of that. It's a different kind of silence this time. Not heavy or uncertain, but shared. You want to ask more? I stopped writing a few years ago. Instead, you reach into your coat pocket and pull out your notebook, the one you started the night you found his name. You pass it to him. He opens it slowly, like unwrapping a gift. His eyes scan the pages, his brow softening as he takes it in. His voice is quieter now. Why? It started to feel like shouting into an empty room. Eventually, you stop expecting an echo. The rain softens into mist. Time becomes irrelevant. Julian looks out at the trees, rain dripping from their leaves like a metronome. You don't speak for a moment. He turns to you. And in his eyes, you see something beginning to thaw, like he wants to believe that's true. "Can I read something to you?" he asks, almost shyly. You nod. He pulls a folded piece of paper from the inside cover of his own book and smooths it on his knee. His voice is gentle as he begins. "I never knew if you were real, or just the idea of being known. But if you exist, and if you're reading, you found me when I'd given up on being found." He looks up. For a long moment, neither of you breathes. Then, without needing permission, you slide your hand over his. Not holding, just touching. Just saying, "I'm here." His fingers curl ever so slightly toward yours. The tea grows cold. There is no rush, because something fragile is unfolding, and you both feel it. This is not love at first sight. This is love before the first word. Julian didn't ask her name that day. Nora didn't offer it, not because she wanted to keep anything hidden, but because it felt too soon to press meaning into something so quietly forming. Some things bloom slowly, and names, she believed, are most beautiful when spoken not out of curiosity, but out of care. The way his voice dipped slightly on the last word of a poem, the softness with which he looked at her, not like he was seeing someone new, but someone familiar he hadn't expected to find again. She thought about him often during the days that followed, thought about the slight crease between his brows when he read something that moved him. On Thursday, she returned to Moonlight Books. She simply nodded as Nora stepped through the door, like she had been expecting her. The old woman behind the counter didn't say a word. She pulled another book, almost without thought, The Small Sorrows by R.L. Connors. The paper smelled like dust and violet, and when she opened it, she paused. Nora wandered back to the poetry shelf again, but her eyes weren't searching, they were remembering. There, tucked between two pages, was an envelope. Old, yellowing, sealed with a faded red wax. No name, no address. Inside was a letter, not dated, not signed. She looked up and saw the bookseller watching her again, not intruding, just present, just carefully written in a familiar script. That one he tucked away quietly. Never told me where. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. But he didn't want to see it happen. He wanted it to happen without him watching, like fate. Or faith. If you find this, I hope it finds you whole. So she simply bought the book and walked out into the soft drizzle. The letter tucked close to her chest. The air smelled like wet leaves and the clouds sat heavy above the trees. If you're not, then may these words hold what you cannot say aloud. I once believed love was for the bold, the beautiful, the loud. He just handed her a folded piece of paper and nodded for her to read. But I've come to learn it waits in silence, too. It watches from behind the curtain. It whispers when the world goes quiet. If you are reading this, perhaps it has whispered to you. Nora folded the letter gently, as if it might crumble from the weight of air. Did he leave this too? She asked, her voice no louder than the rain beginning outside. The woman nodded once. Do you know why? I think he hoped the right person would find it, the woman replied. Nora didn't know what to say. That Sunday, she returned to the bench. She was early again, far earlier than needed, but she didn't mind. But you were the one who was meant to. Julian arrived 5 minutes after noon. This time, when he sat down beside her, he didn't speak immediately. It was warm, slightly rough, steady. It wasn't a poem, it was a story. There was once a boy who left letters and books because he didn't know how else to ask the world to love him back. He never signed them, never told anyone. He just waited, quietly, in the same places week after week, hoping someone would whisper back through the pages. Nora finished reading, then looked up at him. I found one, she whispered, in The Small Sorrows. He looked down, a faint smile pulling at his mouth. For the first time, he reached out, a dramatic gesture, just the soft offering of his hand, palm open on the bench between them. She placed her hand in his. My name's Nora, she said finally. He looked at her as though he had already known. I'm Julian. They sat there in the rain-hushed park, hands joined as the world softened around them. And though no one else would have noticed, something important had happened. Not a confession, but a kiss. But something deeper, recognition. Two souls, not meeting for the first time, but finding one another again in a world that had nearly convinced them not to hope anymore. In the week that followed, the rhythm of their connection deepened, without needing to be named. Every Sunday they met on the same bench, sometimes with tea, sometimes with books, sometimes with nothing but the comfort of each other's presence. Julian no longer brought words prepared in his pocket, and Nora no longer waited for something dramatic to happen. Instead, they let the quiet moments do the speaking. He hesitated before placing it gently in Nora's lap. One afternoon, as the sky hovered between sun and shadow, Julian arrived with a worn leather notebook. This, he said, was never meant for anyone but me. She looked up at him. But I think you're the only person who should read it. It's the first book I ever filled. Poems, mostly. Fragments. Thoughts I couldn't say aloud. Nora hesitated, running her fingers across the surface. The leather was cracked in places, the corners softened with time. It smelled like cedar and ink. Julian leaned back, his eyes on the leaves fluttering overhead. You sure? She asked softly, holding the notebook like it might fall apart if she exhaled too hard. Julian's handwriting varied, some pages neat and methodical, others scattered with scribbled out lines and sudden bursts of ink. He nodded. If you're going to keep finding parts of me hidden in old books, I figured I might as well give you one whole. That night, Nora read each page by the soft light of her bedside lamp. Some poems were full of longing. Others drifted between memory and dreams. A few were so quietly aching that she found herself blinking back the burn of unshed tears. One poem in particular stopped her. I saw her once in a storm, or maybe a dream. Her hair was rain, her eyes were questions. And though we never spoke, she placed it on her chest and lay back, listening to the silence of her room. The air carried a crispness that tugged at jacket collars and made every cup of tea feel like a blessing. Inside were sugar-dusted pastries from a bakery to streets over. They sat with their knees nearly touching, splitting bites between them, laughing quietly when powdered sugar caught on Nora's scarf. I knew she would one day carry my name differently. Nora closed the notebook slowly. There was something unspoken beginning to stir in her. It's not just affection, recognition. You seem like someone who's always known where she was going, but some of us pretend better than others. By their fifth Sunday, the park had begun to change. Autumn had crept in, quietly turning the edges of the leaves, gold and copper. But his silence wasn't heavy. It was full. Like something inside him had shifted, quietly, without needing to be named. And what would I be pretending? Julian arrived with a small tin box in his hand. You're not what I expected, Julian said suddenly, after a lull in conversation. That you've given up on being found? The touch was barely there, but it was deliberate. She tilted her head. What did you expect? He stared out at the fountain across the lawn, where two children were tossing breadcrumbs to pigeons. I thought, if anyone ever found my words, they'd be like me. Quiet, wounded, a little lost. Nora said nothing. But you, he went on, you carry your softness like a strength. You don't seem lost. She shook her head, smiling gently. You'd be surprised. He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth tugging upward. Nora brushed the edge of the bench with her fingertips. Julian turned toward her fully then, one hand resting on the back of the bench, the other cupping his warm tea tin. She met his eyes. He didn't respond. They sat there until the light began to dim, and the shadows of the trees stretched long across the grass. As Nora stood to leave, Julian reached for her hand, not to hold it, but simply to brush his fingers lightly across her knuckles. A thank you, a question, beginning still. Julian didn't come the next Sunday. Nora waited on the bench, a scarf wrapped around her neck. Fingers curled around the spine of whispers at dusk. The air was colder than usual, laced with the scent of fallen leaves and chimney smoke from nearby houses. At first she told herself he might be late. Then she told herself there might have been traffic, a missed bus, an errand that ran long. But as the sun began to dip lower and shadows stretched across the park path, she knew he wasn't coming. Still she sat there for another hour, watching the wind chase golden leaves in circles near her feet. She kept her posture soft, her expression unreadable. To the occasional passerby, she probably looked like someone enjoying a quiet moment with a book. But inside, her thoughts were a flurry of meaning. Every word he shared felt chosen, purposeful, intentional. It wasn't disappointment that hurt her most. It was worry. Julian didn't feel like someone who disappeared without reason. He was a man of rhythm, and now there was only absence. Monday came and went. On Tuesday, she returned to Moonlight Books. The door chimed as always, and the bookseller looked up with something like expectation in her eyes. Nora approached the counter slowly. He didn't come, she said softly, as if saying it aloud might turn it into something more final. The bookseller nodded once, her hands pausing over the parchment wrapping she'd been folding. I know. Nora blinked. You know where he is? Her name was written in Julian's handwriting. She recognized the way he looped the A as though it were a fragile thing. The older woman hesitated. then motioned toward the hallway lined with old frames. Nora followed without a word. No salutation, no goodbye, just a gentle current of words. They stopped in front of a narrow cabinet filled with ephemera-torn envelopes. Black and white photos, dried lavender bundled in twine. The bookseller opened the middle drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This came yesterday," she said. "It's left under the door. No note, just your name." Nora took the envelope slowly. She read it twice, then folded it and pressed it to her chest. Of a man rewriting himself in silence so he could meet her. Not as a character in a book, but as someone whole, awake, and real. "Do you know where he went?" She opened it there, heart slow and uncertain. Inside was a letter. Said if you needed to find him, you'd know how. I didn't disappear. I only stepped back to remember who I was before you found me. I've spent years living through pages, through echoes of a man I wasn't brave enough to be. But now, I want to return to you with my feet on the ground. Not just as the man who wrote poems in margins, but the man who was finally ready to live between them. Every margin note, every poem, she followed the threads, his favorite phrases, his secret hiding places, the parks and corners and benches he'd mentioned. Nora stared at the letter for a long time. There was no address, no promise of return date, just the feeling of something gentle being reshaped. She looked at the bookseller. The older woman offered the faintest shake of her head. "He asked me not to tell." That night Nora didn't sleep. She opened every book he'd touched, reread every letter. She began to write, not as a reader, but as someone who now had something to say. To the man who wrote himself into silence, "If you're out there, let this find you. I've no need to rescue what you lost. I only want to walk with what you've found. Turn when you're ready, not to the pages, but to the place where hands meet in the rain." She tucked the letter into the back cover of Seasons of Quiet Longing, wrapped the book in linen, and returned it to Moonlight Books. The bookseller smiled without question and placed it gently on a shelf near the front window. And for the first time, Nora left something behind, not as a reader, but as someone being read. The days unfolded quietly after that, like soft pages turning with the wind. Nora resumed her routines, but now with a thread of expectation woven through everything. She no longer sat on the park bench hoping Julian would appear. Instead, she walked the long route home past the bookstores he'd once mentioned, paused by the river near the old iron bridge, and wrote every day. Her journal became her confidant. Her words, no longer just a mirror for loneliness, began to fill with hope, memory, and a quiet sort of longing that didn't ache as much as it used to. It simply waited. And then, 2 weeks later, something changed. It was a Thursday. Rain had just passed through, leaving the pavement damp, and the sky a curtain of shifting grays. When Nora entered Moonlight Books, the bell gave its usual chime, but the bookseller gave her a different look this time. Not surprised, not worried. "Warm. Look under the chair," she said, tilting her head toward the far reading corner. Nora walked over, the heels of her boots making no sound on the old wooden floor. She knelt beside the armchair where Julian used to sit, where he'd once folded napkins into boats during their quiet afternoons. There, just beneath the cushion, was another book. Twilight verses by a poet she hadn't read in years. She opened it. Slowly and inside was a single pressed maple leaf, golden and veined. On the inside cover, in familiar, careful handwriting, there are verses that never made it to print. Some are written only in glances, in laughter. In return, folded letter slipped out next. "I saw your letter. It was the first thing I reached for when I came back. I read it with trembling hands and a full heart. I am here, not because I've been found, but because I realized you never asked me to be perfect, only honest. Can I meet you?" Not as a story. There was no desperate flutter of surprise or fear, or the instant between rain ending and the sun returning. It's just a warm, heavy stillness. Families passed by in wool coats. Dogs chased invisible trails. Somewhere in the distance, a musician was playing a slow jazz tune on a saxophone, muffled by the breeze. Not even as a poet, but just as myself, on the bench this Sunday. Nora stood still for a long moment. No part of her rushed, like the moment before the first line of a poem is written. Sunday came. The park wore its best colors: amber, rust, and soft olive. Nora sat on the bench, not waiting, just being. She held no books, no letters, only a scarf wrapped twice around her neck and a soft calm in her chest. Then footsteps, not hurried, measured, familiar. She didn't look up immediately. She knew it was him. Julian came to sit beside her, carefully, like someone entering a room that still held ghosts. They didn't speak right away, but they smiled. It's the kind of smile people wear when they're no longer performing, when their stories have stopped being rehearsed. There's a tiny flat above the paper shop on Bell Street. Just a table, 2 chairs, and enough space for 2 people who like books more than they like noise. Nora glanced at his hands. They weren't trembling this time. And then he said, simply, "Thank you for writing me into your silence." She turned toward him. "You never really left it." He laughed under his breath. "Maybe not. But I think I finally know how to live outside of it." A breeze stirred the leaves at their feet. Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver key. He placed it gently on her palm. "It's for something old," he said, "but I hope it can start something new." Nora looked down at the key, simple, worn, but clearly meaningful. He smiled softly. Nora closed her fingers around the key, not to claim it, but to hold the beginning of something that didn't need to be spoken aloud. The flat on Bell Street was nothing special at first glance. The stairs creaked underfoot, and the windows fogged easily on cold mornings. But to Nora, it felt like stepping into a page of her favorite poem, quiet, intentional, and just slightly unfinished, like it was waiting to be lived in. Sometimes with tea, sometimes with books, other times with silence that stretched comfortably between them, no longer burdened with things unsaid. They didn't move in right away. Instead, they met there once or twice a week. Julian brought an old typewriter, its keys a little sticky with age. She left them open on the windowsill, where the light would warm the pages in the morning. She no longer wrote from longing. She wrote from observation, from presence, placed it on the corner table, and began typing again, not poems for publication, not stories for anyone else, but thoughts, reflections, fragments of days shared with Nora. He called them quiet entries. Nora, in turn, brought her journals. It was of a woman, perhaps the previous tenant, sitting beside a tall man, both reading from the same book. The corners were creased, but the affection in the image was unmistakable. From the way Julian would tilt his head when he listened to birdsong outside the window, from the way their tea would go cold when their conversation ran too long to notice the time, from the hush of the room that didn't ask anything of her. Handwritten notes tucked into coat pockets, nights spent listening to the hum of the city rather than trying to escape it. One evening, while sorting through a box of forgotten items in the flat, Julian found a small, faded photograph wedged behind a drawer panel. Julian handed it to Nora. "I like to think they found this place the same way we did," he said. She smiled. "Maybe they left it better for us, but only for a second. I think about it too. How many times we might have passed each other without even knowing there was something waiting. Because now, I can't imagine not knowing." The photo went up on the wall above the table, clipped gently into the edge of a bookshelf. It became their quiet housewarming gift. Sometimes it was a quiet return, a shared glance, a letter tucked in a book waiting to be found. The weather began to turn. Fall melted into a soft early winter, and with it came rituals that didn't need names. Matching mugs from the second-hand shop, they weren't a perfect match. Nora still preferred silence to small talk. Julian sometimes disappeared into thoughts too long to follow. But they had learned to leave space for one another's soft edges. One evening, Julian asked, "Do you ever think about what we would have missed if you hadn't opened that book?" She turned her gaze toward the window where frost was beginning to dust the corners. "Sometimes," she whispered. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Nora reached across the table and brushed her fingers against his. And we almost didn't. He nodded, his eyes steady. But we did. That was the thing about certain kinds of love. It didn't always come crashing in like a storm. It didn't speak in grand declarations. They didn't need to. Their story had never been about spectacle. It had always been about rhythm. Small discoveries, long pauses. And choosing every day to be present in the story they were writing together. The first snow arrived like a whispered secret, soft, quiet, utterly unexpected. Nora was sitting on the windowsill of the Bell Street flat, wrapped in a knitted shawl, her notebook balanced delicately on her knees. She glanced up as the first flakes fell, dancing lazily past the street lamp outside. It made everything look suspended in time, like the world had been dipped in a dream. Julian entered moments later, shaking snow from his shoulders and laughing softly to himself. "You look like a painting," he said, eyes landing on her. "Or a forgotten verse in the margins." She smiled, closing her notebook. "Then read me." It was already full of the kind of comfort that only comes when two people trust each other as quiet. Snow whispered against the windows as Nora read aloud from an old book of poetry, one sheet he found in the flat S corner shelf, spine cracked and pages slightly browned. He stepped closer, kneeling before her to tug off his damp gloves. "I've been reading you since that first folded letter." They didn't need a fireplace or fairy lights to make the flat feel warm. Later that night, they lay side by side on the rug, a single blanket shared between them. One particular line made her pause. Love, she realized, wasn't always found in the dramatic or grand. Sometimes it was just sharing a blanket while snow fell outside. You were not a thunderstorm, but the gentle rain after it. She traced the sentence with her finger, then looked over at Julian. He was already watching her, eyes soft with memory. Didn't say anything. He didn't have to. This one was wrapped in a blue ribbon, corners worn, the cover stamped with gold stars. It was in moments like that small, wordless understandings that Nora felt the deepest kind of closeness. As winter settled in, they began to form new traditions. Every Sunday morning, Julian made coffee exactly the way Nora liked it, dark. Strong, with a sliver of honey stirred in at the bottom of the cup. In return, she brought fresh bread from the little bakery down the street, always warm, always wrapped in a red checkered cloth. They'd sit by the window, their table cluttered with open books, and napkins scribbled with phrases, their fingers occasionally brushing as they reached for the same page or poured more tea. One morning, as the wind rattled softly at the windows, Julian pulled something from the pocket of his coat. It was a notebook. Not his usual kind. He slid it toward her. "I've been keeping something," he said. "Maybe more." Nora blinked, then opened it slowly. Inside, page after page, was her. I wanted to write the story that couldn't fit in poems, or rather her presence, her gestures, her phrases, moments he'd remembered and written down quietly without ever telling her. They shimmered, unspilled, like morning frost that hadn't yet melted. One read, the way she hums when she reads something beautiful, like she's syncing with it. Another, she never rushes to fill silence. She makes it safe instead. And when I walk beside her, I forget to be afraid. Nora stared at the pages, breath caught in her throat. There were dozens. She closed the book gently and looked up at him. Julian shrugged, just slightly. Tears welled up, but they didn't fall. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "You already have," she whispered. Outside, the snow continued falling, soft and steady. Inside, the silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything they'd shared, everything still unspoken, and everything quietly waiting to unfold. The Bell Street flat had begun to smell like them. Books and tea, old wood and ink, cinnamon from the bread Nora brought home, and hints of lemon from the soap Julian used to wash his hands before writing. Light poured across the floor in thin golden ribbons, catching dust motes in their soft ballet. She stood quietly for a moment, watching him sleep. His breathing even and face peaceful, his arms stretched across the pillow where her head had rested the night before. It was strange, the way love lingered, not only in glances or letters, but in scents, sounds, and the soft rhythm of a place being lived in. On one late January morning, Nora woke before Julian, like someone watching us through the window. She made tea quietly, then returned with 2 steaming cups. As he stirred, blinking at the light, she sat beside him and handed him one. "Do you ever wonder what our story looks like from the outside?" she asked. "Yes." "Do they see lovers? Or just 2 people reading poetry in a too small flat?" Julian took a sip, thoughtful. She nodded. He chuckled. Maybe both. Maybe that's what makes it beautiful. Later that afternoon, they wandered into a used bookstore tucked between a bakery and a print shop. It was Nora's idea spur-of-a-moment walk in the pale winter sun. Inside, the air smelled like old pages and secrets, the kind only books knew how to keep. Her heart skipped. She pulled it gently from the shelf and opened to the front page. Nora drifted toward the poetry section. Julian lingered near the counter, thumbing through postcards. And then she saw it. Tucked between anthologies, its spine worn nearly bare, was a copy of The Drowned Garden, as though love once planted in words could bloom again in new hands. Not the poem she had found months ago, but another. This one handwritten in that same careful script. Something truer. No dedication, no name, but something familiar caught her eye pressed between pages, was a folded note, delicate and yellowed with time. To the one who finds this next, you are the last page I'll ever need to write. But one evening, she slid a few pages beneath his coffee cup. Her fingers trembled. Julian approached, sensing something in her stillness. She handed him the book. He read the note and looked at her. "I didn't write that," he said softly. "I know," she whispered. "But someone did. I think they loved like we do." They stood there for a long moment, surrounded by quiet shelves, letting the connection sink in. It felt like a message across time. Julian bought the book. That night, they placed it beside the old blue notebook on their shelf, 2 voices speaking across pages, connected not by plot, but by something quieter. Nora began writing again, not just journals, it's not just snippets, stories. She didn't tell Julian at first. She wanted them to grow in private, like seeds beneath snow. He read without speaking, then looked up with tears in his eyes. "You wrote us," he said. She smiled. "No, I wrote a version of us, for someone else to find someday." Julian reached for her hand. "Then I hope they find it when they need it most." Outside, snow had stopped falling. Inside, a story was beginning again. February arrived, wrapped in stillness. The city felt hushed beneath a veil of frost, its rooftops white, its alleys softened by snow. Nora and Julian found themselves moving more slowly, their days filled with long silences and quiet laughter. Like the world had gently lowered its voice and asked them to listen. The handwriting was faint and unfamiliar, the paper sealed but never torn. There was no stamp, just her name. One morning, while sorting through a stack of letters she had kept from her university years, Nora stumbled across a small, unopened envelope. She hesitated. Julian glanced up from the sofa, where he'd been marking a passage in a book. "Something important?" She nodded, unsure. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, written in deep blue ink. "Dear Nora, you were reading a book of poems, lips moving as if the words tasted like honey. I never had the courage to speak, but I wrote instead. I left this in hopes it would find you, even if I didn't. I saw you at the cafe near the river once. I just wanted to say thank you for looking like a poem." She passed him the letter. Her breath caught. Julian was already watching her, expression unreadable. When he finished, he handed it back and said, "You've always had that effect on people. Do you think he ever wondered what happened to me?" To trace its roots, to learn whether it had belonged to someone real, or was simply the product of a stranger's longing. They stepped into the warmth of the building, greeted by the familiar smell of worn pages and ink. But I think the mystery was part of the gift. She smiled faintly, touched but uneasy. The same title, the same page, and this time, a name. The delicate lines, the half-erased name, isn't something could be overlooked yet mean everything to someone else. Probably, Julian said. That letter stayed with her all day. Known for leaving anonymous poems and books across libraries throughout Europe. It's not because of what it said, but because of the reminder it carried. That there are people we touch without knowing, and others who leave quiet echoes in our lives. It made her think about the poem she had found in the drowned garden, the one that had led her to Julian. That evening, she returned to the library archives. Not for research, not to chase ghosts. He planted poems. It's like letters no one asked for. But to find the origin of the first poem. Julian walked with her, scarf wrapped around his neck, gloved fingers laced with hers. Nora headed straight for the poetry stacks, while Julian lingered behind, watching her move with quiet focus. But maybe we're the first ones to answer back. After nearly an hour, she found it. An obscure volume tucked into a forgotten corner, Elias read. She whispered it aloud just to hear how it sounded. There was something about it soft, solemn, like a violin's last note. She turned to Julian. This is the one, she said. I'm sure of it. He joined her, reading the brief biography on the inner cover. Elias read, 1926 to 1971. Poet, archivist, private correspondent. Julian blinked. Nora nodded, like seeds in borrowed soil. They stood there for a while, not speaking. Then Julian said, Maybe we're not the first people to fall in love through a book, she smiled. That night back at the flat, Nora wrote a new poem. It's not about Elias. It's not even about Julian. But about the idea that love leaves footprints. In letters, in secondhand books, in people who carry a stranger's name in their heart for no reason except that it felt like fate. She tucked the poem into a slim volume of sonnets they planned to return to the bookstore. No note, no explanation. It's just a beginning. Spring came quietly, unfolding like a secret between two people who already knew. The air turned warmer, the light longer, and Nora's window plants began reaching for the sun again. On the shelf, between the old blue notebook and the faded copy of The Drowned Garden, new books had appeared, some Julian's, some hers, a few borrowed from friends and never returned. Their life had spilled out across the apartment like a soft poem being written one image at a time. They no longer needed to say I love you every day. A soft breeze tugged at Nora's hair. The phrase had settled into the way Julian poured her tea just how she liked it, the way Nora would slide her socks onto the radiator, so his feet wouldn't be cold in the morning. But still, one afternoon in April, Julian asked her, When did you know? They were lying on the roof of the building, a blanket beneath them, the city below in a slow, humming trance. More like a collection of silences that didn't feel empty. When did I know what? She asked, turning her face toward him. Not just here in the apartment, but with me, that you wanted to stay. Nora looked at the sky for a long while. Dare wasn't a single moment, she said. Julian took her hand and traced invisible lines across her palm. You didn't even see me, but the world got quieter in the best way. That's how I felt the day I saw you reading that poem in the library, he said. When you're brave, when you forget we're real. Later that week, Julian disappeared for a whole morning. When he returned, he was carrying a small, weathered box tied with blue ribbon. It's the most Julian thing I've ever read. Antique, silver-tipped, wrapped in velvet lining. And I wanted your first chapter to have something old in it, something from us. And beneath it, a folded piece of thick cream paper. Not for work. For that echo of soft awe she'd felt when she first saw Julian standing at the counter of the used bookstore, leafing through postcards and looking like someone pulled out of a forgotten page, not even for readers. The little patterns, the brush of an arm in a narrow hallway, the hush of a shared silence, the way someone can become home without warning. and about Elias Reed, the poetarchivist who had once believed love could be planted like letters between forgotten pages. "It's not a ring," he said before she could speak. Inside was a pen. Nora opened it. "This isn't a promise of forever. This is a permission to keep writing us, even when I'm not looking. Use the pen when you're scared. Because what we have deserves to live twice, once in love and once in words." She couldn't speak for a moment, and then she laughed gently, wiping her eyes. "Maybe in 10 years? Maybe longer. I thought maybe you'd write a book one day," he said. Nora began writing more earnestly after that, but for memory, for stillness. She wrote about love, not grand, dramatic arcs, but the kind that happens when two people reach for the same book or touch the same railing or laugh at the same joke without knowing why. She wrote about the unnamed man who had written the poem that led her to Julian. She wrote about her own quiet discoveries. And slowly, her story became theirs. On a Sunday morning, they walked hand in hand to the bookstore and left one of her poems in a volume of sonnets, no signature, no initials. Julian slipped another into a book of travel essays. "Think anyone will read them?" Nora asked. "Maybe not now," he said. She smiled, like fossils of affection. He kissed her temple. Love notes in slow time. By late spring, the city had shifted fully into bloom. The riverbanks brimmed with picnickers. Music curled lazily out of windows. And the trees that once stood bare now waved in green, full whispers. Some afternoons they would speak for hours, and other times they simply sat beside each other, letting the nearness speak louder than words. Nora and Julian spent more of their days outdoors, bringing books to shaded park benches and sharing sandwiches wrapped in brown paper. The pages were filled with unfinished poems and hesitant thoughts from years ago, when she had still been unsure of who she was and what kind of love she deserved. One evening, Nora came across an old journal of hers, long forgotten, at the bottom of a trunk. One entry in particular caught her attention. A love that hides itself in the quiet corners between spines, undercoats. Inside books I've read too often to count. Not loud, not perfect, just honest, gentle. The kind that knows how to wait. Dated 5 years back, I want a love that lingers like pages worn smooth by time. She closed the journal, overwhelmed. Each marked by small things, Julian's quiet humming while he made breakfast. Nora's habit of underlining half the books she read, their shared ritual of leaving a poem in a new place once a week. Julian found her like that, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her fingers lightly pressed to the closed cover. "I think," she said softly, "I was writing about you before I even knew it." "They didn't need to." He smiled, kneeling beside her. "I think I was searching for you." Without knowing your name, they didn't say much more that night. They curled into bed as the rain began, tapping the windows like soft punctuation marks. Days slipped by gently. At the library, at the bookstore, in the coat pocket of a stranger who'd left their umbrella behind. Their rented cottage stood on a hill overlooking the sea, surrounded by thyme and wild lavender. They never signed them, never claimed ownership. It wasn't about being remembered. Stories about used books, lost names, secret letters, and the gentle ache of hope. It was about participating in the old soft magic of love, passed hand to hand, line to line. One golden afternoon, Julian looked at Nora and said, "Let's go away. Just for a little while. Somewhere quiet." She asked, "Where would we go?" He grinned. "Somewhere we haven't already left a poem." They ended up in a coastal village, 2 trains away. The sky was streaked with pink and rust. The scent of salt and earth swirled in the air. The town was slow, filled with red-roofed houses and sleepy. It was here that Nora finished her book. Not a grand novel. Just a slim volume of love stories braided together from memories and imagined things, all of them real in the ways that mattered. She called it Letters for the Next Heart. Julian cried when he read it. "I'm in every one," he whispered. She nodded. "You always were." On their last evening in the cottage, They stood together watching the tide roll in. Julian reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small folded note. "You write so many for strangers," he said. "I wanted to write one for you." She unfolded it, her fingers trembling slightly. "If love is the story, then you are the ink. If time is the page, then I want to write you into every chapter. Not loudly, not perfectly, just honestly, gently, until the last word." Nora leaned into him, her eyes brimming, and whispered against his shoulder, "Then let's keep writing." And so the story settles, like dust on old shelves and the last note of a lullaby outside. Their little cottage, the sea continues to whisper against the shore, tireless and tender. Somewhere in the world, a stranger may open a forgotten book and find a poem folded between the pages written in Nora's hand, left by Julian's hope. A presence that lingers in the hush of libraries, the worn bindings of poetry, and the soft gaze between two strangers who pause before parting ways, till choosing books they don't need, just to see if someone else has hidden something inside. Maybe they leave more notes, maybe they leave none. But the ritual, the quiet reverence, it lives on. They may not understand its origin, but something about it will feel warm, familiar, like a memory they never made but somehow still recognize. And when you least expect it folded in an old book of poems or whispered on a train platform, it reminds you that you were always part of something softer, deeper, true. That's what love like theirs becomes. Not just a life shared between two people, but a gentle echo in the world. Let it hum beneath your thoughts, cradle your breathing, and drift with you into dreams. You imagine them years from now, still walking into bookstores side by side. Let it promise that love, gentle, handwritten, patiently found, will always know how to find you, because that's what love does. It settles into your breath, your rhythm, the unremarkable corners of a day. So rest easy now. Close your eyes and hold closed the pages of this quiet love. There, in the space between sleep and memory, let their story keep you company.